Gittin Daf Chaf begins with the Gemara's discussion about writing on top of writing as far as creating a get. We'll get to a number of other sugyas. So the Gemara begins, the Gemara says that Rav Chizda brought up the question, if somebody writes a get shalei lishma, which is possible, can he just write over the letters? Can he write them over again, this time lishma, and that should be kosher? So the Gemara wants to compare it to a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon about writing a Shem Hashem, which also has to be written lishma, has to be written l'shem Shem Hashem. And you have a similar machlokes there, so the Gemara wants to say it's the same machlokes. So the Gemara quotes a brisa that brings that machlokes. The brisa says if somebody is supposed to be writing the Shem Hashem, but he thought that he was going to write Yehuda. So he was planning on writing Yehuda, but then he accidentally left out the Dalid, and he ended up writing the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is what he was supposed to be writing. It was not what he intended to write. So that means that he wrote the Shem Hashem, but he wrote it Shalei Lishma. So what should you do? So Rabbi Yehuda says you just write it over. Write on top of it and write it Lishma this time, and you write it with the Kedusha that it requires. Chachamim say that is not a proper way of writing Shem Hashem, that's no good. Someone wants to say that's the same thing over here. Can you just write over the words of the get, this time Lishma? Rabbi Yehuda should say yes, and Rabbanan should say no. So the Gemara says Rav Acha bar Yaakov disagreed. He said no, that the Rabbanan would actually agree that it's okay by the get. The only reason they had a problem with doing that by Shem Hashem is because it's not Zakeli Maveh. It's not beautifying the Shem Hashem to write a name, to write the Shem Hashem on top of an already written Shem Hashem. Now the Gemara quotes of Chizda, who said that I can show that every single get in the world is puzzle. It's all no good. So Rava said why, and Rava brought two potential reasons and rejected them both. Rava said, first of all, you may say, because there's a takanas chazal that the woman has to pay for the get. She has to pay the scribe who writes the get. The problem is that it says he should write it. It says v'chosav. So that should mean that it's puzzle because we're not doing what the Torah said, that the husband writes the get. Which says no, not necessarily. The takanas chazal that she writes it, which was made for her benefit, by the way, could be that it still counts as if he's writing, because what the Rabbanan would do was they took her coin that she gives and they were mezakeh it to him, and therefore it's considered to be technically his money. So that's one reason, which is not a reason to say that every get in the world has a psul. Second reason is because the Torah says that he should give it to her. It says v'nasan. V'nasan implies giving her something of value. But we write a get without any value in it. So Gemara says that that's not a psul either. Because when it says v'nasan to give, it doesn't mean to give something of value. It means to give a get, which is significant and important because of its halachic significance. And Gemara proves this because it says sholchu mitan, they sent from Bavel, that you're even allowed to write again on something which is asur b'hana, something which has literally no value, because you're not allowed to use it for anything. It is forbidden to get any hana out of it, and that is permitted to use for a get, and therefore that proves that you're allowed to write a get even on something that has no value. Now the Gemara goes and analyzes this halacha a little bit more deeply. So Gemara says, we said you're allowed to write on this or no. Rav Ashi wanted to say that is supported from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said you could write it on a leaf of an olive tree. So you see, it also has no value. So Gemara says, no, it's not quite the proof. Leaf of an olive tree can be used. You can make a mattress out of it. Now, it does not have a value of a pruta. It's not worth the smallest coin, but it still could be used. Isser hana has 0, 0, 0 function. Nothing. So therefore, it could be that would be useless. Now, the Gemara records that Rebbe said that it's kosher to write a get on Isuri hana. Levi went out and said a drush in his name. He publicized this halacha in the name of Rebbe, and people didn't praise it. It didn't seem to sit well. And then he said it over again, and this time in the name of the multiplicity of Tanaim. He said it in the name of the Rabbim, and here everybody accepted it. So Mar says, you see that Levi went to great lengths to make sure that people would accept this halacha. Obviously, this is halacha l'maisa, not just Rebbe's opinion. Okay, now the Gemara moves into a different sugya, and that is the sugya of can you write a get by scratching, by engraving, or by creating forms where you're not using ink. Is that a valid manner of writing the get or not? So Gemara quotes a brisa that says v'chosav. It says you have to write it and not engrave. So Gemara says, you mean to tell me that engraving doesn't count as writing? But we can show otherwise. We can show that in Eved, you have a brisa that says you're allowed to give an Eved a get shecher by writing that's on a plank, that's on a board, or it could be writing that's on a pad, a notebook that you write with a pen with ink. Either one is okay, and either one works. The other thing you can't do is you can't sew it into cloth. So you can't write with threads that's in a special type of head covering that women wear, or can't be sewn into pretty cloth that they wear, that the thread makes the letters. That doesn't count as writing. So either way, so we have a contradiction here whether engraving works or not. So the Gemara answers, Gemara quotes Ula, who quotes Rabbi Elazar, who says there's two different types of engraving. There's, are you engraving the letters themselves, which means that they are sunk into the surface, or are you engraving the area around it so that the letters rise? Now, if you're engraving the letters themselves, you're making the letter. That should count as writing. If you're engraving the area around it, it should not count because you're not really making the letters. You're messing with everything else, and the letters are being formed by themselves. That should not count as real ksiva. So the Gemara asks a contradiction to this from a brisa which describes the making of the tzitz. There were letters on the tzitz. It said Kodesh Lashem. The brisa that says it was made like a coin. It was made like a golden dinar coin. Now, the Gemara is assuming, how was the golden dinar coin, how was the face or the form that was on the coin, how was that made? So you took a form, you took a mold, and you put it over a piece of gold, and you hammered it. So it pressed the sides around the image down, and the image appeared because it was not hammered. That means that you're doing it in the way which we're saying is not writing. You're pushing everything else away and leaving the image, or if there are letters, they're also, without making them, they are just left memela. So Gemara says, so then the tzitz, if the tzitz was made like that, then the tzitz is not writing, but we know that the tzitz, it says pituchei chaysim, that it is writing. So Gemara answers that the tzitz was made like a dinar zav in the sense that the letters protruded outwards, but not the same as a dinar zav, that it was made by hammering a form, hammering a mold into the metal. It's not how it was made. It was made by turning it upside down and hammering the letters themselves into the back of the mold. And therefore the letters themselves are made, so that counts as writing. It would not count as writing to make it in the same way as the coin. Gemara now has a similar exchange, very similar, between Ravina and Rav Ashi. So Gemara says, Ravina asks Rav Ashi, how is a coin made? We know how it's made. You take a piece of metal and you put a mold over it and you hammer it, and the form, the image, appears. But what's happening? Are you just pressing the sides down and the image, you're not changing and it just appears because the sides are pressed down? Or are you actually squeezing the gold into filling the space of the form so it actually rises further than it was before because you're squeezing gold in there? What's the difference? Difference is this question exactly. Are you making the form, or is the form just appearing because you're moving everything else away? Nafkamina would be if you make a get in that way. Let's say you make a get by hammering a mold on top of a sheet. Do we say the letters are made in that way because they fill the form? You push the metal into the open space of the form? Or do we say you just push everything else down and therefore it's no good? So Gemara says, it answered him and said, no, you just push everything else away. You're not actually making the letters. So Gemara again has the same exchange as before. So Gemara asks, what about the tzitz? He said that the tzitz is made like a dinar zav, and the tzitz had to be writing. It had to count as writing. So if it was like a dinar zav, it must be that the letters were being made, not just that everything else was being pressed away. Someone says it wasn't made like a dinar zav at all. It was like a dinar zav in the sense that the letters were raised as opposed to depressed. But it was not like a dinar zav in how it was formed. It was turned over, and the letters were hammered into the back. The Gemara now goes to another shayla about somebody who writes the get on a sheet of metal. The Gemara says, what if he writes the get on a sheet of gold, so it's very valuable, and he gives it to her and he says, here, I'm doing 2-in-1. This is your get. It's also very valuable, so it's also the payment of your ksuba. Take the value of the gold as payment for your ksuba. So if he says that, what's halacha? So the Gemara says this question was asked by Rav of Nachman, and he answered, it works as both the get and the ksuba. So as a kasha, we have a brisa that says if he says something similar, but he says they're slightly different. He says, take the get, and the rest of the gold that's part of this sheet, that's your ksuba. Then it works. It's clearly only because there's other gold besides the get itself, besides the written part of it. So how could Rav Nachman say that it works even if there's nothing else, even if it's all part of the get itself? Someone says, no, it's not a kasha. In that case, it would have worked even if there was nothing else. There's a chiddush, an extra chiddush, that we wanted to say that it's the something else, that there's extra space on the metal sheet, on the golden sheet. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is that it only counts as a ksuba payment if he tells her, I'm giving you the rest as a ksuba payment. You may think, well, he gave her extra value. He gave her extra gold that wasn't needed for the ksuba, so that should be good. That wasn't needed for the get, so that should be a ksuba payment. The answer is no. We view it as part of the get, and as he's giving her the get, and he has to give her the get, she has to receive it, and therefore it wouldn't count. Unless he tells her, I'm giving you the get, and is extra that's left over, that counts as your ksuba. The Gemara now quotes a related brisa. Brisa says, if he gives her the get, and he says, here's your get, but I'm keeping the paper belongs to me. So the Gemara says that is no good. She has to receive the get and has to belong to her. Otherwise, if he's just giving her the get and he maintains ownership of the paper, so the letters are flying in the air, that doesn't count. However, if he does say, here's the get, it's yours, but it's on the condition that you give me the paper back afterwards. So that works. That's what's called a matana manasa hachzer. He's giving it to her, it's hers, but she's obligated to return it. Fine, but until she returns it, it's hers and she's received the get. And of course, once she's divorced, doesn't matter what happens with the get. Now, Rav Papa has to shaila. Rav Papa says, what happens if he says that the space of the paper between each line and between each word, that belongs to me? Somewhere says, take you, we don't have an answer for that. Somewhere asks, why don't we say that it's no good, because the Torah says to give a sefer krisis, a scroll, a book of separation, but here it's multiple books, because the pieces are disconnected, because she only receives the part that has the words and the lines and the letters on them, but everything else goes back to him, so it's all chopped up. So Gemara says no, because we're talking about where the letters all connect. Every letter touches another letter, and every row touches another row, so it's all connected as one, and therefore, even if he would take away all the blank spaces, she would still have one contiguous sheet. Gemara now moves on to discuss some shaylos pertaining to a get written on the hand of an eved. We had seen in our Mishnah that you're allowed to write the get on the eved and give her the eved, and that counts as giving her a sefer krisis. That works as a valid divorce. So Gemara says, the question was asked by Rami bar Chama. What if we knew that a certain eved belonged to the husband, and we know that the get is written on his hand, and now we see that she has it. She has the eved. So the first question is, can we assume that he gave her the eved, and that's why she has it, and therefore she's divorced? Or since it's an eved, maybe he walked, maybe he went on his own to her, and therefore it's not a valid divorce. Now, if it would be a piece of paper or anything else, we wouldn't have this concern. This is a particular question about an eved. Someone says, hold on, slow down a second. How can you write a get on an eved? A get has to be non-erasable, non-forgeable. If it's erasable, it's no good. Maybe there's conditions written into the get that were erased. So Rava says it's no good because it's forgeable. Someone says, hold on a second. The Mishnah said that it's good. So what's Rava talking about? Well, how could Rava say it's non-forgeable? Someone says, Rava has no problem with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is talking about where there are witnesses that saw the husband give the get. And we don't care about the writing of the get. We're holding like Rabbi Elazar. The witnesses who see it are the ones who create the divorce. And it doesn't matter if it's erasable, it's not erasable, it's not a problem. So Rava doesn't have an issue. However, Rami bar Chama here is saying that there was no witnesses who saw him give it to her. Because if there were witnesses who saw the husband give the eved to the wife, the whole question wouldn't start. Maybe he walked. Of course he didn't walk. There's witnesses who saw. So there's no witnesses. So the question is, if there's no witnesses, so you're not obviously Rabbi Elazar, because there's no the Mesira. So you're obviously Rabbi Meir, and you're relying on the writing. If you're relying on the writing, then how could you rely on the writing if it's erasable? So my answer is that it was tattooed. And then once it's tattooed, you could say that in Rava also, would understand the Mishnah that it's tattooed, and that we're really Rabbi Meir and not Rabbi Elazar. So now the Gemara says, okay, we've discussed exactly what the shaila is. We clarified that. Now, what happened? What was the answer to the question that Rami bar Chama asked? Answers the Gemara. We can learn simply from a halacha that there's no such thing as a muhsik on animals. If you're holding an animal, that does not prove that you bought the animal. The animal could have wandered into your land. So if the original owner comes and proves that he was the owner, you can't say, well, I must have bought it because I have it. That's not a proof. So the same thing would be true for the eved. You cannot prove that he was given to the isha. It could be that he went on his own. Okay, now the Gemara has a reverse shayla. The Gemara brings again Rami Bar Chama, who says, what if we have a board that we know used to belong to her, and now she still has it, but now there's a get written on it? Can we assume that she gave it to her husband, he wrote the get and gave it back to her? Or do we say a woman does not know Hilchos Kinyanim, and she may not have given it to him properly, and therefore may have been hers while he wrote the get on it, and it doesn't work because he has to be giving her something? So Abaye says, I'm going to answer this from a Mishnah Masechus Idyos. It says that Yehuda ben Vava testified that there was an old man who lived in a little village near Yerushalayim, and he would lend money to a lot of people. Now, when you lend money, you take a star from them that you hold on to that proves that they owe it to you, that you can collect with that. But here, he didn't take the star from them. He would write the star himself, and he'd have people sign it, and we could rely on it because of the signatures on it. And the Chachamim there said that this is a kosher way of doing things. It's fine. So this is what happened. You have to have that the borrower is giving the star to the lender, and here that's not what happens. So obviously, you see, it must have been that it was his thing, and he was makne it to the lender, and the lender gave it back to him. Where says that's not a kasha. He was an old man. An old man knows halacha. He knows how to be makne. But how do you know that the woman would be able to do that in the proper way? And the Gemara therefore looks for other proofs to answer this question. So the next proof, and here we're already into the next stuff, is from Rava. Rava brings a brisa that says that an arev, a guarantor, who signs on a loan document after the rest of the document, meaning after the signatures of the witnesses, the guarantor signs underneath that. Generally, he'll sign above the signature of the witnesses, so the witnesses are testifying, and his acceptance of financial responsibility to pay the debt if the borrower defaults is included in the body of the shtar. Here, he signed after the entire shtar was sealed, signed.